Hi, everyone, and welcome back to The Things We Know. Today, we are talking with someone whose work we're excited to learn more about, especially as we watch the world shift around us and think about the impact the state of the country and the planet is having on today's youth. As parents and as people who care deeply about community, we're always paying attention to what young people are carrying and what kind of support they actually need. So it felt like the right moment to invite a leader who works on the front lines of youth development and community building.
Yeah, so we're so thrilled to welcome Shawna Rosenzweig, the CEO of Campfire, a 115-year-old national nonprofit. That's so cool. That has impacted more than 700,000 young people and families since 2017. Shawna is known for bringing people together to create real, meaningful change. She has led major cultural shifts, advanced equity efforts across a huge national network, and worked closely with partners like the National Indian Education Network and or Association, sorry, to end cultural appropriation in outdoor youth programs. So I want to say that again, the National Indian Education Association. And alongside that work, she is a millennial parent navigating leadership, identity, and work life balance in real time. That makes her voice such a meaningful match for our community of women who are also navigating big chapters and asking what leadership looks like at this stage of life.
One thing that stood out immediately is that Shawna leads with creativity, collaboration, and genuine curiosity. She's reshaping youth development from the inside out while also living a full life as a partner, parent, and woman leading the nonprofit sector during a very complex and changing time, and challenging, I'm sure. Many of you listening are reimagining your careers, parenting older teens or young adults, rediscovering your voice, and trying to lead with alignment and resilience. So this conversation feels like a gift at exactly the right moment.
I'm especially drawn to her work because I spent my early career in youth development and community engagement. And so this conversation feels both meaningful and full circle for me. And I'm really excited to learn from her perspective in leadership. So, Shawna, we are so glad you're here with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Excited for our conversation.
Yay. Thank you. How does it feel? We always like to ask people that when you hear it all said about you when you're right there, how does that feel?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say y'all are very good for the ego. No, yeah, it feels good, right? And I think oftentimes, especially as women, we don't give ourselves the credit we deserve, right? And so to be able to hear it and kind of celebrate it in real time feels really important, actually. So
Yeah. Do you receive it as you hear it? I mean, you've done all these things, but to hear it
right,
being said, right? Like,
yeah.
does it sort of like sink into your being?
Yeah, it does. There's moments where, right, you're so deep in it that you can't fully recognize, and then there's other moments, right? Like I'm trying to get much better at the pause, right? To say
Good.
like let's celebrate that. I mean, I remember when my mom, now retired, was a transit planner here in Seattle, and it wasn't until her retirement party that I found out she was instrumental in getting lifts on buses, right, to make public transportation more accessible. And I actually remember
Wow.
being really upset with her at the time, both very proud of her and upset of like, how come I'm finding this out at 30, right? Like, why didn't I do
Yeah.
this growing up? This was a huge part of, her work all throughout my childhood. And I think about that a lot as a woman and a mom and how I, both lead professionally, but also, yeah, personally as a parent in terms of, really making sure that my kids are aware of what I do and the accomplishments along the way too.
Oh,
Mm,
thank you for doing that. That is so
yeah.
really, really important. And you're right, women, we do a lot of like, thank you next. Like we get something done and then we just move on to the next. So, all right. So before we get into the current work, we'd love to just start with you in general. When you look back, we've done a little obviously bio, but what were the early experiences or influences that pulled you towards youth development and this kind of leadership? It sounds like maybe your mom had a hand in that.
Yeah, she might have. No, I think, for me, I really think about the teachers that were in my life. I mean, starting out in kindergarten, like my kindergarten teacher, all I wanted was to be her, right? Like I had my
Yeah.
very nice like 80s, 90s headbands in her honor. Like I was fully into she was my role model, right? And as I as I grew up, there were other, teachers and educators that again really played that kind of web of supportive adults in my life, right? And both could, be that mentor relationship and be that role model, and for that reason, I knew I liked working with kids, but I thought the way you do that is by becoming a teacher. And so, it was really all the way through college where that's what I planned to do. And it was really by chance that I stumbled across the youth development fields. Again, I had worked in it as like my high school job was working at our local day camps and, working at an after school program. And, but that's just how I thought you make money as a teenager, right? I didn't understand that as a professional pathway or career opportunity. And I think I was actually procrastinating writing a paper towards the very end of college, and you could go see this documentary film for some extra credit. But it was about this camp program in Maine that takes high school students from different regions and conflict all around the world and brings them together for 3 weeks of conflict resolution and traditional summer camp activities. And I was blown away. I was like, 90 minutes later was like, what is this and how do I be a part of this? And, ended up spending the next 2 summers as a camp counselor there and some time in the Middle East with them in between. But that really shifted kind of my understanding of the spaces I wanted to be in terms of like there's this whole out of school time space that is so powerful in shifting young people's perceptions of both themselves and others. And I've been there ever since.
Wow, that's awesome.
Wow. It sounds too like you have built a career that's weaved together, not just youth development, but equity and organizational transformation. Like, how did all that come together for you?
So I can probably again trace it back to relationships and mentorship, right? Both the good, the bad, and the ugly, And so, one of actually a former teacher who was, really one of my first supervisors at one of the after school programs I worked at, was a mentor to me throughout, college and beyond. And I remember there was one moment where we were, I think I was back in town from college and, we had met for coffee and at the time I was struggling with my own identity development and, who I was and who I was going to become. And, he essentially made a comment about, there'd be nothing worse than my own kid being gay. And that was the last time we spoke.
Oh,
Right. And, again, it was just a moment of like not being able to be fully seen by someone and, and especially someone that you trust. Right. And so, I think about, while yes, certainly it hurt in the moment and, and all of that comes with it, it also, I think, has served as this really helpful reminder of like, how do you create spaces where people can show up fully and authentically? And again, if I look at kind of the through line, through all of these pieces, whether it's, addressing cultural appropriation and, summer camp settings, again, that's because it's limiting other young people from being able to show up fully and authentically as who they are. They're told they don't belong in some ways, right? And so really, yeah, just looking for different ways, whether it's in workplace culture or, in youth programming that, yeah, how folks can bring their authenticity. And I think I feel that a lot as a woman too, as a leader as well, right? That oftentimes the type of leadership we are kind of told that will get us ahead is, a more kind of masculine oriented, form of leadership, or even, generationally, it can look very different. And so I think that's another piece as well is, as I, transitioned into the CEO role at Campfire saying like, hey, what does it look like to be a millennial, a woman, a mom, all of these things, and to show up authentically in the role.
I, maybe I like to believe that I'm surrounded by Gen Z who are indicative of Gen Z. But I am curious because my kids, and I know Carrie's as well, like cultural appropriation to them is like kryptonite. And so do you find that with the kids you're working with, or is there still a lot of teaching involved?
Yeah. So no, I agree. I think it is like kryptonite. And really, one of the things that makes Campfire, one of our values in action is how we talk about it is, honoring the power of young people and really letting them lead. And so, yeah, it was young people in our programs that said, hey, like I don't feel safe, comfortable, like I belong, right? All of the things. if I'm seeing right, kind of these made up names of, cabin groups or cabin names or whatever it is.
Mm.
Right.
And, again, it's been a really interesting process to kind of lead and facilitate through, because we really did say, hey, like, let's turn to the young people, and what do, the reward and recognition items you're earning in a program look like, and not only did they, obviously not want it to be appropriative, but they also said, like, hey, like, a year from now, I'm not even going to remember what I earned this for. Like, how can I help spark my future self to understand my accomplishments? And yeah, so again, I think so much of it is creating the spaces for Gen Z and the next generations to come, to make the programs and the spaces what is meaningful to them. And I think it also helps, some of us older folks to get out of the way a little bit, right? And to see our role as, like, how do we support them to create the organizations or the spaces they need, as opposed to, we don't know what it's like to grow up today. And yeah, and so again, how do we kind of create the support for them?
Well, then I want to ask, I'm sorry, I want to ask sort of a follow-up to that.
Yeah.
So we're Gen X, right?
Mhm.
And um, I'm aware of it being kryptonite to my kids because of situations that I've been in. And my response initially, I've gotten much better at this. This was actually a couple of years ago around Thanksgiving, was like, well, that's how we grew up. And my son in particular, we had a bit of a throwdown about it, and he just wasn't standing for that. So my opposite question is, do you work with Gen X who are having a little harder time coming aboard?
It's funny. I was just about to say, what kind of
Okay.
pushback are you getting
Yeah,
from
yeah,
board
yeah.
members or something? Yeah.
No, it's a great question. And so, yes, I think, and I will say, and this is really, so much respect to, many of the Campfire Girls alumni that are,
Hmm.
out there, that they've really, have collectively said, yeah, we recognize that at its core, the experiences young people are having, through Campfire programs are the same, right?
Mm,
And it's the method to that, or the pathway young people are taking to that, may look different in today's reality, right? I mean, there's technology and all these different things that just didn't exist, at the time of that they would have been in the program. But yeah, I think there was concern, certainly, of, like, who's going to be most upset. Um, and, again, it's not about blame or fault or guilt, that it really is, it's been much more of, I think, like, an education journey. And I
yeah.
think even more so, for me, the real lesson in it is you have to give folks something to get excited about. Like, you can't just take something away, right? And, like, I had a really interesting conversation with a friend who, is a religious clergy. And he was like, this is a grief process, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
you can't just take things away from folks and not expect them to grieve, but instead, how do you help them see what's next and feel excited to be a part of that change?
Mm,
And to me, that has made all the difference.
mm. You
Yeah.
might
It's
need, like,
amazing.
to say that on a global stage. That's really smart.
Yeah.
um, so you stepped into the CEO role of a really old organization. How long ago was that for you?
In January.
Oh,
So
wow. So
Oh, holy moly.
like, what has been your leadership journey, and how, like, what have you learned about yourself in the process?
great question. Well, I said to a colleague yesterday that, so I've been with Campfire, I guess, about 12 years now, but in the CEO role since January. And I said to a colleague yesterday, and they were like, what is it like leading in this time, right? Like, when everything feels like it's just changing and evolving so rapidly. And I actually said, I'm really glad I've never been a CEO before, because I don't know any different, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's just, you're able to, in some ways, I think, be more present because you don't have a past to compare it with, and I remember when I was, considering taking the job, I had said to my wife late at night, like, in some ways, I wish this was happening 10 years from now, when the kids were,
Mm,
older, and, so my kids are 8 and 11, like, when they were, out of the house, or, more independent. And I actually feel completely differently about that statement now that I've been in the role, in that I'm a better leader when I have balance in my life, right? And I
mm,
have to also model that for my team, right? Because I want them to have that balance too. And so actually, like, having the sports games and coaching my daughter's basketball team and, all the things that, draw your attention in 50 different directions. I'm really glad those things exist at, 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, because that ensures that I am actually like turning it off and taking care of myself. And yes, it requires some creativity around like, when am I, moving my own body and, how do I fit that into the schedule? But yeah, in a lot of ways, it actually has been a blessing and not a challenge that I anticipated it to be.
I love that. We were
I just
actually,
wrote that down so we could quote you later. That's just beautiful. I'm a
yeah.
better leader when I have balance in my life.
Well, and I said to that point, we just wrapped a different episode before we got on with you, and I was saying we've done a couple episodes in season 3 around the book The Power Code, and one of the things that really struck me reading that book was that Gen Z is going into their career life, their working life, going, you know what? I am going to have work-life balance from the get-go. I actually, my son's girlfriend had a very nice paying job. It was running her ragged, and she was like, "This is not worth it." And my son was the same way. He's like, "You should not be doing this. There's no amount of money that's worth this." And so she left that job to get a different job that had more work-life balance. And I think boomers and Gen X kind of go, "Hey, blah blah blah," but I think it's brilliant. And so you being on the forefront of that as a millennial, and then showing your campers and showing your team that this is actually doable, that balance, I think that's probably going to be so impactful in a way you may never
Yeah.
even know.
I hope so, right? Again, I hope so, because again, it's the chance to like, how do you do it authentically? And I
Yeah.
think, again, it was that rub of like, you know, yes, I've been fortunate to have a lot of, mentors and to witness other folks in CEO roles and, those I look up to and those who I may want to do things differently from. But there was definitely a moment in there where I had to say like, okay, am I trying to like copy what they did, or my perceptions of what they did, or am I going to really find my own flavor and kind of how I'm going to fully show up in this role? And again, it's, there's so many moments of like doubt and imposter syndrome and all the
Sure.
things that like, creep their way in all the time. But really just to have the like, okay, let me sit with this for a moment. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I will always overthink everything if given the opportunity. And so to really just say like, hey, like I've got this. And hey, I'm gonna make this my own. And in some ways it took the pressures that existed in those other spaces, they lifted, right? And that was
Yeah.
helpful.
Oh, I love
Hmm.
this so much.
Go
No,
ahead.
go ahead. No, you.
I was just curious, like when you talk about that balance, like what it helped, like what are your tricks, like what do you, or tricks or practices, like what helps you stay grounded?
What helps me stay grounded? I'm still figuring this out. This is ever evolving, right? I mean, one of the newer things I'm trying is, I try to get up you know, at 5:50, 3 days a week to go work out in the morning, right? And it's like rather than make myself bonkers trying to fit it in, after school or after work, I say, hey, this is going to be my me time. But it's also
Mhm.
a space, where it's hard. And then also I think it's teaching me that like it's okay for something to be hard, right? And I can still progress through that. I mean, I actually like right when I started the role bought one of these Aura rings because I was like, I actually just want the self-reflection of like, what are my stress levels? And like at
Yeah.
what points in the day do they fluctuate? And that's actually been, or like how am I sleeping? And that's actually been incredibly informative to have like a little bit more data, but not too much to say like, okay, hey, like, no, it really is important. It's the reminder to be like, hey, do you need to move your legs a little bit? And you're like, oh, yeah, I've been sitting here a very long time. And so, again, I think for me, it's been like, it doesn't have to be huge. It can be these small things like getting up to let the dog out, right? That's taking some steps. Or doesn't have to be
Yeah.
exercising 5 days a week, every work day. It can be 2 or 3, and so yeah, looking for those opportunities. And I think also, so like work travel, I travel a lot for work, and I've made a rule for myself where on the outbound flight, right, as I'm headed to somewhere, I can work on the plane. Like that can be time to catch up on email, prepare for, a presentation, whatever I'm doing. But my rule is on the way back, one, I'm usually tired. to like, that can't be work. That has to be me time. So it can be watching a show, it can be reading, it can be messing around on my phone, playing a game, whatever. Uh, but just kind of creating some of those opportunities where like, where does that space already exist versus trying to like pack more into a schedule where those spaces feel impossible to find.
I love that because what I'm hearing is something Carrie and I say all the time, which is it's never about being perfect. It's about trying something, seeing if it's working for you. What's working for you right now, maybe a year from now, doesn't work. As your kids get older, and we think as they get older, they need you less. They actually don't need you less. Sorry, spoiler alert.
I know. I have heard rumors of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I promise you it's true.
Just
Just
different,
different.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah.
differently.
Just
Yeah.
differently, yeah. And so I love that because you're trying things. What's working, what doesn't work. And the small steps do matter, both in what you're trying to change as well as physically the movement. So you're just reiterating what we always say. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think also the spaces to like both take those breaks and like, the whole like you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Right.
And so, as I've been listening to your podcast, and also, learning about the opportunities for like the retreats that you host, again, like those are opportunities where it's like you have the chance to kind of refill your cup and
Yeah,
pour into yourself a little bit before pouring into others. And again, I think those, even though it can feel hard to make the time and space, it doesn't have to be that you're doing them every month, but like, can I try one a year? And
yeah,
just setting that
Yeah.
as the goal. But again, I think it's like those are the types of things that help restore that balance.
Yeah.
absolutely. So what else, like in terms of, since you are a millennial parent, navigating all this leadership, family in real time, um, like how has parenting shaped the way you lead? Because forgive me, I don't know the ages that of Campfire. So are your kids like right there in the age group? So are you using some of what you're learning as a parent and back and forth in that respect?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah,
Yeah.
so Campfire, yeah, serves young people essentially through the full gamut of, we
Okay.
say 5 to 18. And I'm starting to modify that because at the top, and I'll tell you why. So many of our emerging professionals, right? Our camp counselors, our after school staff, our program managers, we're their first entry into the workforce oftentimes,
Mm,
right? And if you look at brain science, they're still in their own kind of late stages of adolescent development. And so while they are, working in our programs and it's a professional experience, it's also a personal development experience. And so I think a lot about that demographic as not only, the staff that make the magic happen for the younger people in our program, but, they're also growing and receiving the benefits of Campfire programming as well. But yeah, to your question, yes, my kids are smack in the age range of it. Yeah, last year they got to go to their first Campfire day camp. They are signed up for overnight camp this year, and I have one who's already like processing through of like, so do I have to shower while I'm there? Like, how does this work exactly? So, yes, I very much am living it both personally and professionally. And look, I often will reflect that there's so many things that I know in terms as best practices from a youth development space. And then as a parent, I'm like, whoa, I really just messed that one up. Right. And so again, I think
Yes.
it goes back to the messaging of like, we can't always be perfect, right? But
yeah,
it's
No.
like we just try to do better each and every time. But again, I think some of the pieces that I think about a lot are just like, right, how can I support my kids to just kind of authentically be who they are in that moment? And that's going to change and evolve, right? And, so much of Campfire, we talk about, do young people have the skills they need to thrive now and in the future, right? And so when I think about my own kids, as they, understand, their what it means to support their own well-being and their mental health and just the challenges of navigating, young peoplehood and childhood today, what are the tools that they have in their toolbox and how can I kind of support them to have some exposure to that? And again, making sure that, while I want to turn the work off to be fully present with them, also not shying away from sharing the opportunities with them. I mean, I was laughing, my 8-year-old, I had the opportunity. So my daughter and I are big like women's sports fans. And so you can imagine the moment when, so the Seattle Reign here, our National Women's Soccer League team, honors a community, what they call their community legend, every so often. And so when I found out I was getting it, I was like, oh my God, like her and I were both losing our minds over it. But so I was laughing because my son, on the other hand, who, right, had already been to a campfire camp, gets in the car after school like a week before and goes, so campfire is a real thing? It's like, wait, you actually do something? And so again, kids are very good at like both keeping us grounded, but this is the
Yes.
same kid as I was, reading this book about adolescent brain development. He's like, what are you reading? And it was by the president of one of our funders. I was telling him about it and he was like, read me a page. And so I was reading it to him and he was like, oh, so that explains why my sister is acting the way she is right now. He was like, she's entering adolescence, and so
Oh
again,
my
it's this
gosh.
like I think really kind of fully seeing and embracing young people to ask the questions and to, reflect on what they're seeing and hearing and experiencing throughout their lives and understanding that that's going to be different for every young person, right? Whether it's, you know, because of how their brain works or their abilities or any their identities or lived experiences, they're all going to process and make sense of the world around them in different ways, and creating space for that and support for them in that, I think ultimately makes us all better, whether it's as a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or a teacher, kind of whatever role young people play in your life.
Oh my
Amen.
gosh. Speaking of roles, because like we're talking to you as a parent and then someone who's just doing this incredible work and, for young people, before I do want to go deeper into this great work you're doing, but I do want to ask you a question about like, what do you wish more employers and organizations understood about working parents?
Mm.
And I know you're both employer and working parents
Yeah,
here, so
I know.
both roles.
Yeah. I think just that flexibility is key, right? And flexibility doesn't mean that you aren't committed, right?
Mm.
I think oftentimes commitment means like, oh, I will drop everything to be available at all hours, or to, I will never ask to go pick up my kid from school or take them to a doctor's appointment, right? I'm committed to my job. But I think actually, from again, kind of more of the lived experience, I think when folks experience that flexibility, they actually can be more committed to their jobs and they're more productive and engaged. And so, again, I think thinking about doesn't mean that everyone needs like unlimited time off, though, I do think there is value in that. But like, one of the things that we've introduced is, summer Fridays, right? Like, what does it mean to have flexibilities to use Friday? And if it's, you have kids in your life and they're in school, and take that day and go for a run or go get a massage or just lay in bed and read a book. Or if it's, hey, more time with my kids or my family or loved ones, that, yeah, well, I think finding the space for the flexibility actually increases commitment. It doesn't decrease it.
Agree.
Lovely. Mm. Okay, so you oversee an organization that works directly with young people at a time when, like we've alluded to, youth mental health, identity, and belonging are all in the spotlight right now. What are young people teaching you? Like the kids you work with, your own, like you've mentioned some of it, but what is your biggest lessons of this, I don't know, past year and in your work?
What a great question. Uh, the first thing that comes to mind is like ask for what you need. Like you don't
Mm.
get if you don't ask. And again, whether it's, back to when we were talking about cultural appropriation or supporting, young people, their own well-being, it's like ask for it. I think another thing is that I think social media and cell phones, right? Like they take up a lot of space in conversations and in our lives. And actually, young people are really asking for the break from it. Like, I was talking the other day about actually, with my spouse, and we were talking about, our own kids going to overnight camp and what it'll be like to, not, have kind of real-time contact with them for a week. And, I was saying, who sneaks the cell phones? It's not the kids, it's the parents, right? And so, but really, again, young people are asking for the breaks from the kind of performative stuff that they're having to live through on social media, and they want that real world connection, right? And and I think, and also that they want to learn. I mean, one of the things I was struck by was in Austin meeting with some of our direct service staff, right? Our staff working directly with young people. And, one of my questions to them was like, why Campfire? In a city where they could work for a lot of different youth development organizations. And, they were like, well, the pay is good. So I was glad to hear that. But more interestingly and importantly, they were like, I heard being in the outdoors is good for you. And if I work for Campfire, I'm going to learn that too. So it wasn't
Hmm.
that they already were believers, right? Or they already had tons of outdoor experience, that it was this safe space to like try on something new and learn something that will support your well-being. And I think about that so frequently because I think that's the beauty and the magic of an organization like Campfire is you don't have to be proficient. You don't have to be, ready to go backpacking for a week to be part of our programs. It's like, oh, I can, learn how to step outside and look up and understand what that does to kind of re-regulate my system.
Mm.
I think that's really fascinating because as you're saying all of this, I'm thinking about parents who women, moms who might be listening, right? Especially of younger kids, your age in particular, right? Because this is the age where they start to ask for the cell phones and the things.
Yeah.
And as a parent, you may fall prey to the pressure of, well, everybody has one, blah, blah, blah. I know for us, we got our kids' cell phones when we moved to Los Angeles and we didn't have a landline anymore. And it was like, oh, well, this is the only way we can stay in touch. And then my daughter got in trouble and we not only took her phone away, we gave her a flip phone. We were like, we still need to be in touch, but you're getting a flip phone. She will tell you, and told me actually within days of doing this, that she was so happy that and she was about 10. And she was like, I'm so glad you took that away from me because she started playing guitar. She was like, I was feeling the pressure, exactly what you're saying, of being performative, of doing all the things I was seeing on Instagram. I knew I needed to get out of it and I didn't know how. And so I guess both you saying the thing about the cell phones and wanting to get outside, as Gen Xers, we spent all our life outside without a phone. And I think parents fall prey thinking we have to do this so that our kids aren't left out. And really, our kids don't really want it. They say they want it, but they don't. And I'm hearing from you that that's what's really driving your campers and your camp counselors.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, it's like, I love your example because I think so often we see things as kind of black and white or all or nothing, right?
Yep.
And it's like, no, we're not saying there's no way to reach your kid or that young people are saying, hey, I don't want any way to be in touch, right? I feel this all the time when my kid wanders, next door to their friend's house. Like, how do I
Yep.
get you back here? And like, what's the easiest way to reach you? And that it's like, right, how do you learn? We're not going to live without these things, right? Like
Right.
there's not, I think, a feasible scenario where suddenly all cell phones go away or social media just
Right.
disappears. But it's like, how do we learn to live with it in moderation and, find the ways it can be a tool to support our well-being as opposed to a threat to it, right? And so again, having the flip phone, right, that still provides those ways to connect, the feelings of safety, all of the things that the purposes it's designed to serve without maybe some of the pieces that, right, create the pressures, the threats to your well-being.
Yeah, I mean, definitely my husband and I have talked about if we could wave a magic wand, we would not have gotten them iPhones as early as we did. We would have done something a little more rudimentary, so to speak. Okay, so Campfire, we've talked about this. I think we've landed on this a few times, but really it is about creating safe, inclusive, welcoming spaces for youth. And I think more important, I mean, obviously Campfire's been around over 100 years, but feels more important than ever right now. So what does that look like in practice today?
Yeah. What does it look like in practice? So depending on where you are and who we're serving, it can look quite different. But at its
Okay.
core, there's some essential elements that are part of every campfire experience, whether it's, in an after school program that is in your school building, or it is, right, making the trip to an overnight camp where you're going to spend a week in our programs. And I think you'll find right in those spaces a few different things that, again, young people have voice and choice in how they spend their time in the program, right? I was up in Anchorage visiting one of our programs and, got to hang out with a bunch of first and second graders in an after school program. And I watched one of them, and she just scrambles over and she like quickly fills out this sheet and I'm trying to figure out what she's doing. Turns it in. Well, sure enough, she thought of an activity that she wanted to lead. Like, let's see what this would be like in this program. And, the next day she was going to do that. But you could see the little light bulb go on for her. And it was like, I want to do that. I also think it's space for young people to try new skills, right? That it's not something you already are a pro at, but it's the opportunity to say like, hey, maybe like, yeah, what can I try that's new? What can I, and maybe I will find a new passion or purpose in that, but maybe not. Maybe it helps you say like, nope, not really interested in that. That was fun, but never again. I also think it's folks who, it's both near peers and adults that recognize your potential, right? I think about again a second grader in one of our programs who, like many young people who lived through the pandemic, were behind in reading, and her local campfire really saw the potential in her. And even though she was, a grade level plus behind in reading, said, "Hey, you would be the perfect MC for our gala." And, she had like this little step stool that she climbed up to even like see over the podium, and she was this phenomenal host, right? And what happened? Her reading went through the roof because she practiced every day with her campfire staff, and she suddenly found this sense of purpose, and she saw that these people around her saw potential in her in a way that, right, she wasn't experiencing in the classroom, as she was needing additional support around her reading, etc. But she found kind of she was able to see herself in a new light. So again, I think that's another way as well that, again, it's these chance to be building connection. Our mission, as we talked about, it's connection to the outdoors, connection to others, and connection to self. And so if a young person leaves a little stronger in any one of those three areas, we've done our job.
Well, can you talk a little bit more about the outdoor? I mean, I love the story earlier, but why does outdoor learning still matter so much to young people today?
So outdoor learning matters, I think, from a few different levels. One, right, we have the research now that we know it improves your health, right? Both your physical and your mental health. So
Yep.
getting young people outside is key to supporting their well-being, right? And so again, and it's not only getting them outside, but also again, like how do we utilize the outdoors as a support for our well-being? So is it right, I mentioned like teaching them that they can look up, right? And what that will do to re-regulate their system, or going on a walk, right? Or listening. I love when it's like kind of the all of your senses, right? Like what do you hear? What do you see? What do you smell in this setting? But giving young people the space again to really kind of pause and reflect. I think it also brings that sense of awe, right? Inevitably,
Mhm.
whether it's like some crazy looking slug on the ground or, seeing, an eagle flying in the sky, like the outdoors creates these little and big moments of awe for young people. And we know that, has this physiological effect on people in a positive way. Another reason, right? Like our goal is not only that young people feel comfortable in the outdoors, and we know not all people have had equitable access to the outdoors, so that we can both build comfort for all people to be able to not only, right, enjoy the outdoors and feel the benefits of it, but also care about it, right? We know we are leaving the next generation with a mess of a situation in terms of climate and environment. And ultimately, right, if you don't know about it, you can't care about it. And so to support young people to see themselves as not only stewards, but I think a lot about as hopeful stewards, right? Like if you
Mhm.
don't feel hope in a situation, you're not going to feel compelled to act. And so
Mhm.
that they are really, yeah, see themselves and see potential and hope in our future for what it means to support kind of the natural world around us.
Mm.
Wow. I, ca- I don't know how I want to ask this because I'm feeling that really deeply, and I remember this, and I love the work of your organization because there's so many people, so many communities that don't have access to camps or outdoor programs. What what kind of efforts is your organization part of, or that you see happening right now that's giving you hope, or that like tells you there that that's a goal, or that's like a growing effort? Or I don't know, maybe I'm asking that, or asking how people listening could learn more about that and support that.
Sure. So yes, we do it in a lot of different ways. And so we have, a multi-year, we're actually coming up on a decade of really intentional efforts to, especially overnight camps, right? Overnight camps tend to uh, have the most kind of inequity in terms of access, not only because of cost, but also location, et cetera. And so some of the things, certainly one of the things we have implemented are, kind of sliding fee scales or camperships, right? Just as scholarships would exist, right? How do you alleviate some of the financial burden, right? One of the realities when it comes to out of school time and after school care is, right, things like after school programs and day camps. You can use your flexible spending accounts for, but you can't use them for overnight camps, right? And so, how do you help close some of the gaps that exist around that? But that's only one piece of the puzzle, right? There's also a piece around, what do I need to bring with me? And do I have access to that, right? And so, we also look at ways, right, where there can be, if a young person gets to a program, and then suddenly doesn't have the right gear, really making sure what we have, gear libraries available for folks that there's, no, you don't have to ask questions. You can just come have access to a towel, a swimsuit, shoes, a rain jacket, whatever it is that you need. Some other ways that we do it also, again, in ways that the spaces tell young people either explicitly or implicitly that they don't belong. And so, for a lot of our trans and non-binary young people, it was having all gender cabin spaces or private changing spaces. I mean, I talk a lot about curb cuts, right? Like the curb cut that was put in, right, for someone who either is temporarily or permanently using a wheelchair, and yet all the other ways we benefit, right? Whether it's like pushing a stroller, pulling a grocery cart, we all benefit from curb cuts being in. And so, while private changing spaces may have been introduced to support, trans or non-binary young people at our camps, who actually says they benefit the most from them is the teenage boys. They feel like they're getting teased and bullied less. So again, it's like
Wow.
thinking about opportunities for that. For our neurodivergent young people, we introduce calm corners, right? It's a space that's quiet. There are sensory objects, but again, everybody's benefiting from having a calm corner where you can just go and reset, or having an alternative to a very loud dining space, and so again, a lot of it is looking for opportunities to introduce, what become curb cuts, right? What end up benefiting everyone. And if people are interested in supporting that, we have something at the Campfire National Office called the Friendship Fund that exists solely for what you're talking about, right? So it is a resource pool of dollars that we essentially open it up before each season to our Campfire locations, because each of those needs are different, right? And if there, maybe there's a family camp for a community that has not experienced an overnight camp before, and so no one has sleeping bags, or it's to ensure that they have the gear library available, or to buy some new fidgets for a calm corner or soundproofing equipment. We've seen it all. Supporting the Friendship Fund essentially allows us to say, hey, here's some money to meet your needs, to help close these gaps around making programs more accessible in whatever way best meets your local community's needs.
We will
Excellent.
definitely put that link in the show notes.
Mhm.
I can't escape what you just talked about without just what's striking me is with the loss of DEI this year, not recognizing how it affects everybody. Again, Kari and I were just having a different conversation where I said one of my favorite episodes that we've done ever is when we spoke to her friend about inclusion for the disability community and how we're all going to be there some point, because a lot of that is just being a senior citizen. But you say sharing that curb cut thing, like that's everything. And here we are in a space that it's being taken away inside. So I just one more thing that I'm just like, oh my God, I'm so thankful for the work you guys are doing.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that just really touched me. I'm so glad you're doing that. What I want to ask next. I feel like you're just I'm so impressed by you. You've helped shift a lot of long standing traditions, including addressing the cultural appropriation that you touched on earlier when we were introducing you and your shares. And I'm just curious, like, what did that work teach you?
It taught me, well, it taught me a lot about myself. So, I mean, that's maybe where I will start with this, right? And actually, this was kind of in reflecting with my advisor from grad school when I was in a role that, it was an organization I loved and yet a role I didn't love. And I was really kind of grappling with that. And it really kind of became the precursor for a lot of this change work that I've been fortunate to lead. And, she was really pushing me to say, like, what is it that you love about the work you do? And, in that conversation was able to distill down that, like, I love to create, like creating and curating things is something I really enjoy. And so to be able to understand that, not in terms of a position title or a job description, but in terms of like, how am I like, what is it in terms of how I'm spending my time and like the things that I get to focus my time and attention on. And so to kind of have that understanding and then go into so much of this like change management work and organizational change work, was really, really helpful. I think
Nice.
another piece is like, I think it also, it's easy to focus on where the resistance points will be, but the other piece that I found incredibly helpful, while that is, I think, like the default and knee-jerk reaction, actually focusing on like who are the supporters of this? Like who will be on board and understanding, that when you look at kind of the history of change movements, et cetera, like it doesn't take 100% to create change. Like anytime there have been these big monumental shifts, it's actually like 20 to 30%. So you don't
Right.
even have a majority, but understanding that and like kind of thinking about like the power of the collective in that scale also just completely, I think, shifted my mindset of like, hey, we can have a small but mighty group really driving a change effort forward. And then folks will come along, right? Then it'll be normalized and it'll,
Yeah.
become just our way of work. But it doesn't take everyone to be on board with it right away, right? It can just take the small core group and, the ripple effects begin to be felt much further beyond that. So those are two things I think that stand out to me when I think about it. And I mean, the other thing I guess that I, said earlier too is like, what are you giving folks to be excited about, right? It's so
Mhm.
easy in change to think about what you're losing, but it's like, what is it that everyone is like looking for? And it doesn't need to be fully fleshed out or developed, but like, what is that thing that can get everyone excited, and how do you build on that momentum?
I
Mhm.
think that's ginormous. I think that's huge. It's such an interesting point. So, what feels important to you as you look to this next chapter? I mean, it feels like you've been there forever, just based on your knowledge
Yeah.
that you've been in this role for a long time. But you haven't. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just a year by the time this episode comes out. So, when you look towards the next chapter of Campfire and your own leadership, what feels most important?
So we are embarking on, I'd say, two major initiatives that I will tie back to my own leadership. But one is the launching of our Native partnerships work.
Mm.
And that's really giving us the opportunity to both find new ways for, campfire programming to reach more young people, and it also, I think, is a key part of the repairing harm work of the cultural appropriation and the harm that we've caused as part of that. And so, and that's all done, in partnership with Native communities and tribes and or Native organizations. And so, again, back to kind of the theme of creating and curating, I'm really excited to launch that work and think about how we, create and curate a new partnership. And again, kind of how do we curate from indigenous knowledge and wisdom, both about the natural world, but also, just culturally relevant and responsive programming to support Native youth, both in existing campfire programs and in new programs. And another one is we're launching something called our connected leadership model, but is really, again, looking at kind of leadership through all levels of the organization. And how do we ensure we're really supporting the full person within that,
Mm.
right? And so it's kind of bringing some elements of character and character development, and really, again, kind of the asset-based work we do through positive youth development, ensuring that folks feel, supported, connected, that they are growing. And so, yeah, I'm really excited for that because I know I'm not only going to learn a lot as part of that as well, but ultimately, yeah, it supports kind of all levels of our organization and, all these different ways that, again, create that web of support for young people.
I love it. One of the things I'm really hearing about your leadership and where you're going with this is just flexibility and recognizing that while this organization has been around for over 100 years and obviously met the moment each time, you don't have to be stuck there. And I think it's just really beautiful that you just see this is an organism that is living and that is going to be shifting and changing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So we always ask, our guests if they have a favorite song or a theme song, and it sounds like you and your 8-year-old came up with one.
Yes, so I'm sitting there racking my brain because, as my friends will tell you, they are always are making fun of what I'm listening to. And so, yeah, I enlisted some help from my 8-year-old, and he did not pause for 1 second, and which is why I appreciated this. So, yes, his answer. And funny enough, I had gotten there myself last night, but wasn't about to tell him. Is a song called Inside Your Heart by Gloria Estefan. So it actually was part of the Vivo soundtrack. That
Oh,
should tell you
cool.
where I spend a lot of my time in movies. But one of the reasons why I both love the song and think, yeah, it kind of embodies, who I am and who I try to be, is it essentially the song starts, and I have the lyrics up here, but it says, "The plane leaves in the morning. Soon the world will see you shining. I wish I could go with you, but your journey isn't mine." And talks about the world will soon adore you as I learn to live without you. And again, I think so much of that is both like, the folks who have poured into me and supported me along my journey and never tried to make it their own, right? But again, come in and out of your life too, right? I think that's another part of it that, there are so many strong women who, were supervisors or, office mates or, teachers, whatever, that I feel so fortunate to have had as examples. And, some I am very fortunate that I talk to all the time, and others I haven't spoken to in years, but that doesn't mean they're any less present on my mind as those examples. And, this is always a song that I tell the kids, like, this is very much how I think of, parenting and being your parent, that, one day, yeah, you will get on a plane and leave. And, like, your journey is not my journey. And like, I will always be cheering you on and supporting you. But, it is your life to live. And that's theirs, right? And it's theirs to shape. And so, yeah, that was the song that we came
It
up with.
feels
I
like a
love it.
perfect song.
That really touched me too. Just,
Yeah,
oh,
I know. It's like, oh, I got like full body
I know now
chills.
you can go listen to it and cry. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a
yeah.
really nice song
I'm,
actually.
I'm
So
Because you've
glad
got some
it,
time before your kids get on a plane. Carrie and I do not have that
I
time.
know. So now you can drop
yeah.
them at the airport and actually cry
I'm
with
actually
them.
really glad tomorrow they come home. So,
Exactly. There we go. So yeah.
yeah.
Is there
Oh,
anything else you want to share that we didn't touch base on? This has been an absolutely mind-blowing conversation. Again, Carrie and I were just talking about how our guests, especially the ones that we don't actually know before we get on these Zooms, just blow us away. Where it really, in moments that can feel really dark, I can look to our guests and just feel it's so much hope. Um, because there are people I don't know that are doing great things, and you are definitely an example of that. So, is there anything else you'd like to share that we didn't touch base on?
Well, I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, if folks are feeling hopeful and compelled to act, we are always, there's many ways to get involved and support Campfire, whether it's through donations, board service, locally or nationally, volunteer opportunities. So I encourage folks to get in touch with us and check out our website, which is campfire.org. And we are always happy to help find ways to, yeah, bring more people into the Campfire community.
Love it.
awesome. Thank you so much for being here. It's really been a pleasure. And everybody, thanks for listening. And I hope that you'll consider contributing to that Campfire Friendship Fund. That's really cool. I already grabbed the link while we were listening, so we can make sure it's in our show notes.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. I've really appreciated this conversation.
Oh my gosh, thank you for being here. And everyone, please, this feels like a really important episode to share. Again, it's easy to just drop a few dollars. So go ahead and take this opportunity now. Thank you again, Shawna, and everybody else for listening. We'll be back next week with something else we know. Thanks, everyone.